All right, so I'm here to talk about how the Container Store uses AppDynamics in the development lifecycle, mainly the testing phase. I'm a big testing background, so it's not strictly just development, more testing. So my name is Azzarello. I'm a quality engineer with the Container Store. I've been doing this about almost 18 years now. I'm experienced in automated functional performance testing, in heavy volume systems in hospitality and retail environments. So if you don't know already, I'm a raving fan of AppDynamics. You'll probably be able to tell by the end of this. But it's more from the fact of, I think there's so much we can pull out of it to better processes around it and, really do some innovative things that's not only in a production environment. So kind of an agenda. I'm going to talk briefly about the Container Store, challenges, solutions, some best practices that we try to use, benefits, and then a little bit of Q&A time. The Container Store, y'all ever heard of them? Anyone? Cool. Okay, so we're the leading retailer of storage and organizational products. We have about 10,000 products that we can organize your life with. We were founded in 1978, based out of Dallas, Texas, and currently we have 77 stores nationwide. One cool thing is we've been on the Fortune magazine's 100 best companies to work for 16 years in a row. So we're pretty proud of that. You can check out our website at www.containerstore.com. Or read about our foundation principles, our culture at www.whatwestandfor.com. Okay, so challenges. When I first started the Container Store, I had never heard of AppDynamics actually. I came in from a previous high volume system. We were writing our own monitoring tools, our own proprietary tools using some open source, and honestly, we stunk at it. We weren't very good at it. So when I was first introduced to AppDynamics, I started, it was a little under 2 years ago, and it was in January when I was sitting in one of my first meetings in the e-commerce team. And we were looking at problems reported by our end users 60 days back. And we were looking at AppDynamics, and that was my introduction to it. But it was production problems gone all through the holidays, and we were asking why, what was this trend, how did this happen? So I was fascinated by the tool. I left this meeting saying, wow, that's awesome, what can we do? I went home, I totally geeked out in AppDynamics. I stayed up all night, I was showing my wife, she's like, go to bed, you just started a new job. I'm like, this is really cool. So the next morning, I went in, I emailed the e-commerce director, and I said, AppDynamics is really cool, thanks for introducing it to me. He responded short and sweet, but very empowering, great, you own it. That was all he responded, so cool. So I instantly started thinking, how can we avoid problems in production? How can we avoid things, impacting our customers? How can we better our processes to avoid these negative impacts that we're having? How can we be reactive instead of proactive? How can we be proactive instead of reactive? Everything we were doing in AppDynamics was reactive. We were only in production looking at problems that had already happened in production. They already impacted our end users. They already impacted, financials, many impacts. So I started talking to myself, how can we catch things prior to impacting our customers? How can we do it during the development life cycle? How can we improve our processes to minimize impact to customers, to give stakeholders in the business, confidence in our product? I kept asking myself, why aren't we in a test environment with AppDynamics? It all boiled down to that, really. So one thing we quickly found when building an automated test suites and for performance and functionals, we had no insight in the test environments. We had no idea what the hardware metrics were doing. We had no idea in error rates unless we're chasing logs. All we knew was the end user outcome of it. Resource limitations were hard to detect if you can't see the back end of it. We had no idea on thread counts. Just so much lack of data. We could build all the automated suites we wanted, but if we can't report on it, we don't know what they're doing, they're not very useful to any of us. So, I left there thinking, how can we ingrain performance and application monitoring into our culture, our development culture, is really what my goal was. So, like I said in the challenges here, we had no insight in the test environments, lack of reporting, customer impacting issues, and our APM solution was reactive only. So solutions. One, we dramatically increased our footprint in AppDynamics, the license. We brought it into our test environment, and we started saying, how can we wrap test processes around this? Not only performance, but functional also. Bringing it into the test environment put us in a position to really ingrain it in our culture. We're a very agile team, and we wanted to be able to see these metrics during our test, earlier in the phase. So one of the worst things we could have is a performance problem as we go, right before we go to the field. We want to do this early in our environment. So, baseline performance and functional metrics, by building the functional and automated suites, we're able to produce production-like traffic, testing known business transactions that we have in production. We brought them down to test. We basically brought our entire production environment into the test environment for our business transactions. And then we could test service layers directly. We could, isolate problems, minimize regression times, and improve efficiency by pinpointing errors and performance issues. So, to kind of summarize, we brought in our test environment. We're still building automated test suites, and baseline performance and functional metrics and alert on any deviations in a test environment. So a couple cool features that I use. I'm kind of, AppDynamics is rather new, but I think some of the core features of AppDynamics are the most powerful features. I want to expand on what else can we do with those core features. The one is transaction score. I'm probably going to call it transaction analysis because they renamed it on me. But it's a great way to easily identify trends in the number of normal, slow, very slow, stall, and error transactions with response times, baselines, and triggered events all on the same dashboard. From this single page, it's easy to drill down, set a global time range, and then drill into any issues you're seeing. Being able to look at the application as a whole and then drilling down into a specific business transaction can prove very powerful to identify trends for any period of time. And these are live screenshots from our test environment. The flow map, cool. It's really cool. One of the original features of AppDynamics, but it's so powerful. So using the flow map, you can identify and utilize all the tiers that you're testing. For example, if you're testing a single tier, a single service, you can tell every service that talks to it. You know exactly who you need to regress. You don't have to do a blanket test across the whole thing. You can minimize your testing, but do targeted testing, more efficient testing. If you reverse that, if you change transaction on, say, a cart checkout transaction, what tiers are used during that cart checkout? You can reverse it upside down and go test, only regression test the various tiers that cart transaction calls. So the flow map is a powerful graphical representation of what your application is really doing. We learn calls that we didn't even know we were making with the flow map. Learning those in a test environment's a lot more fun than in a production environment. So from this, we're actually able to tell what our automated tests are hitting. We're able to tell what we should be testing, and we're able to identify gaps. And then we can also help prioritize what we want to automate from this. But having a regression suite and then running it and seeing all the tiers that you hit with that is a nice bonus to your automated suite. Dashboards. So dashboards are cool. They're so dynamic, powerful. It's a great way to increase visibility into your application across various teams. They're easy to set up and maintain, and just templates available. They're a great starting point for anybody. So we can set up dashboards for operations, for production, for various things, but we could also set them up during test environments. We can set them up for a small little agile team and a dashboard of what your automated test did last night. You can also have them scheduled and have scheduled reports that are basically your dashboard. So if you say you run an automated suite one night, take your dashboard snapshot, right when you know the time is, and it'll be in your email box when you get in the next day. That's what your dashboard was at the end of your test. So it's great to have during the production deployments where you can quickly identify any changes in behavior, but also you can prove what you expected in test. If I expected X performance increase, I should be able to realize that when I move to production. Compare releases. So same type thing. We can use the API, be it like your any Bamboo tool, any continuous delivery tool, and tag events and deployments and new versions of code when they go out. So you can easily compare release A to release B in a test environment, and then do the same thing when you move to production, just like you would, and realize that your expectations are correct, hopefully. So it's really a way to minimize what you need to look at, go dig in data, this and that. On one dashboard, you can read any metrics you want to compare it between individual code changes. It could be an individual bug fix. Compare release. It could be an entire huge release. It doesn't matter. It's a new code change that you're doing. So obviously, it depends on what you want to look at on what the change was, but it's a good way to kind of graphically analyze what did that change really do. So the metric browser, it's so dynamic. The metric browser, you can easily graph out any metric you need and make a custom report out of it. You can export it to CSV, PDF. It's a really cool way to make a report that is not a metric that's on a canned report. It's been very helpful when looking for specific metrics. We use it to complement the reporting of our performance testing. It enables us to have consistent reports sent out after each test run and archived for historical purposes. You can kind of see the flow of it. We do continuous testing right here. In the middle of the night, we do some load tests, short ones. So you can kind of see, calls per minute, response time, just a general snapshot of what we're doing with the metric browser. So tools that we're using, we use Selenium in our Ruby bindings for our functional testing. And for our performance testing, we use a cool tool called Locust.io. It's a Python framework. All open source. I think our goal is open source is a big community out there for it. Obviously cost. We'd rather spend more money to hire more scripters or more engineers or more AppDynamics licenses. But there you go, Austin. But the real reason in Python, it gave us the full Python library for the performance testing at our disposal. And what it enabled us to do is we can define, instead of defining massive just spam and get requests, we can define true user behavior. User A hits the welcome page, browses, adds to cart, checks out. User B hits the welcome page, goes to location, search for a site, maps it out on our website. So you can define what a real user does from production, script that out. You can handle things like cross-site forgery tokens by getting the previous request, parsing it, and passing the token forward. But it's real behavior. On top of that, in our production, and most likely any e-commerce site that you guys are on, you see a lot of noise, bots, just a lot of noise. So to complement this real user behavior, we write crawlers that generate that noise, and then we add the user behavior on top of it. So with this same tool, it basically handles all the multi-threading for it. From a single Linux box, a 4-core CPU, we could generate all the load we want plus some. I mean, we could bring down our entire infrastructure inside. And it's just really powerful because of the same tool, we can use service layer testing, and the same exact script can be a functional and a performance test because you can also have the Python library do your assertions for that. And then you can spin that same script up into 1,000 users doing it. So it's kind of cool. It's a really powerful tool. I recommend you check it out if you get time. Okay, so best practices. And this is kind of something that we realize we're all constantly striving for. I hope to learn more best practices coming to events like this. But kind of what we kind of are shooting for here. So monitor everything. If you can't see it, you can't test it or monitor it. Pretty safe to say. Make health rules and test. Promote to production. Rules, business transaction rules. All those things should be done when the code is being developed. And then when you go to production, you don't have to figure out how to alert on it. You don't have to figure out what business transactions. Move it to production with your code. It's just part of your process. Test continuously. So in a test environment, we actually run in development mode. We capture every single snapshot. Don't do that in production. But in a test environment, everything, whether it's good or bad, I want every piece of data I can get. You never know when you're going to need it. So test continuously. It helps you build baselines, build data, and then it also betters your ability to alert on deviations in a test environment. Slight things, a user behavior transaction that does a cart checkout, maybe the last code change used 2 more threads than it did the time before. Well, when you explode that in production, that's a big problem. So small deviations can be big performance problems in heavy load. Dedicated automated environment. This is a hard one to get by a lot of your ops teams. This is something we fought for and we're fighting for continuously. More automated environments. We don't want manual testing and random stuff in there. We want to know exactly what is going through our automated environment. That's what we key on. That's how we can trust our baselines. That's how we trust our error rates. That's how we trust everything in our automated environment. So we want a dedicated automation environment. Performance test early in the development cycle. This is also one that's often overlooked. The earlier the performance problems are detected, the less impact they have on the release cycle. So worst case scenario is you find a day before you go to production, you're in bad shape. Someone at a user group session stopped me and said, what's worse is actually you find it the day after you go to production. So I don't want to go into my boss and saying, it's too slow, we can't roll it out the day before we go. Start it early. As soon as you get a piece of code turned over, as soon as you have something to test, throw a performance test at it. Start honing it. Where are your slow queries? Where's your bottlenecks? You'll find them earlier on, and it will not impact your cycle. So another kind of cool side effect, which is an ongoing thing, is it really empowers development and QA team members. For example, you now have a situation where an automated test can catch a bug. Someone that's non-technical at all can export a snapshot of that bug in a PDF format and attach it to a bug report. Now you have a developer that gets a bug report that says, wow, line 78 called this select statement that has no index on that table. They're not spending time trying to figure out where to start. You want your developers coding, you want your testers reporting defects. I don't want a developer sitting there trying to figure out where it's broken, I want them to just fix it. So that's kind of empowers it, but it really can forge a team relationship. A lot of times there's a barrier to break down between test and development. It kind of breaks that wall down and really puts you in a situation to forge a strong team around it. So another thing I kind of want to test on the testing continuously. We don't test performance load to break the system 24/7. We throw a minimal amount of load with production-like traffic, and then at night we do large tests, large load tests. We do a lot of crawler tests that check for broken links that we can also validate. Not only does a crawler report broken 404s, but AppDynamics tells us HTTP codes also at the same time. So we get multiple data points telling us we had a bad code change last night. So I mentioned in development mode, that's something that proves to be very useful. It's a lot of data, you get a lot of snapshots, but when you're really wanting to count your metrics and have a really honed, isolated environment, you want all those metrics. Do that in a test environment. So when I say monitor everything, another thing I wanted to kind of bring up is, think outside the box on what you want to look at. A lot of people on an automated test, they don't look at network. I have my Selenium test running, they passed. But I didn't realize I used twice as much bandwidth coming out of my test environment. Oh, there's a large graphic on the home page. Odd things you catch. Watch your network. CPU, memory, the obvious things you're going to look at. But you're not going to look at disk writes and disk reads and CPU weights and things like that. That's when you monitor everything, you want to look at all that data, all the data at your hands. So, onto that, kind of key metrics. The obvious in the infrastructure, CPU, but break CPU down into CPU time waiting on disk IOs. Disk usage. You want to look at average queue service times. There's so much data in there that's collected that when you look at the high level of AppDynamics, unless you really dig into it, you don't see it. You don't really have a need to. But in a true isolated automated environment, when you can look at all this data, so you can find small little deviations that when they get into production will explode and will ruin your day. So, memory, garbage collection times, but not even only that, break it down into, your different pools of garbage collection. Why is my code cache out of memory all the time? JDBC connections. Why am I using 2% more JDBC connections on my same automated test? Thread pools, various, all the metrics available you want to take a look at and keep track of them as you go through your automated testing. So with functional testing, we pull data from our Selenium scripts. We have nice dashboards that we pull that are outside of AppDynamics. But very quickly we know functional errors. If we had an increase in HTTP error codes, if we had cart transactions erroring out, all the key transactions, business transactions that we want to watch, they all go through our functional automated test. So we see the error rates from that without even really necessarily needing to look at what the Selenium script really did. It's designed, we know what it did, but if our error rates increased, we knew we had failures. A lot of times, it's not going to tell you a cosmetic issue or a misaligned table on a page, but that's not really what what we're doing in all of our automated test tools. It's not quite the visual test. It's more the functional test. Can you do a cart checkout? Can you add to cart? Can you log in? Those are things that you have to be able to do to be successful. But if they're airing out in the middle of the night, we're being alerted on it in test environment, just like we would in production. Number of calls. This is something that is a constant battle for us, and I'm sure many of you. A good example is a number of calls. We had a nice little cart icon that, and if you had 5 items in your cart, every page you went on, it showed you a number 5 on that little cart icon. But what we didn't know is it was populating the entire cart, all the SKU data, description, all this, every page load just for that number 5 up there. We found that in AppDynamics. Why is a catalog page doing 400 requests, a SQL request to populate, where are all these requests coming from? When you dug into it, that's exactly what it was. So, you realize that small mini calls will explode on you in production and expand and just wreak havoc in a production environment. Calls to back-end services. If I'm calling a tax calculation service multiple redundant times, I want to know about it. If I have a baseline on that data, what an automated test does, I'm going to know as soon as I deviate from that baseline. Calls to remote services. We have a lot of third-party vendors. A lot of people can't tell you what transaction makes a call to them. Use the flow map. A cart transaction makes X calls to these services. And then I baseline how many calls it makes, and then the average response time, and then alert on deviations from it. So, a few little extra slides here, but expedite remediation of performance issues. Auto-discover and monitor end-to-end business transaction performance with minutes, no overhead. This is true. A lot of people can't tell you what their environment's doing. We put AppDynamics in our test environment, and AppDynamics told us what calls we were doing. It told us what calls couldn't get out because we were firewalled off that we needed to get out. The auto-discovery is cool. It's cool in production. It's more cool in test. I kind of stand by a motto with this. If I'm spending too much time in production in AppDynamics, our processes have already failed us. We have to work on our process. Stuff's going to happen in production, but I want to minimize how much time I'm in production in AppDynamics. So the self-learning platform is just really, it computes optimal app performance. I don't know that it really computes what your current app's doing. If you start with a slow app, you're going to have a slow baseline. You're going to work on it. But as you go through a process and you start chipping away at this huge problem of performance, you re-baseline. And you can change your baseline. If we make a major code change and we realize, wow, our baseline is just bad, we go back to a 1-hour rolling baseline, and then we build it back up because our baseline is no longer good. But we want to know if that next code change is worse than that one that made that huge difference. So we build our back up to our 30-day baseline. We try and stay on our 30-day baseline. Resolve application issues quickly for exceptional end user. So if something does happen in production, you've heard this all over the conference, I'm sure. Everyone's freaking out. Why can't you check out? Why can't you check out? Then you jump into production. Give the developer what they need to fix it. Drastically improve the time that you have an outage in production. Hopefully, you catch that in test. So, production readiness and pre-production in a test environment. We can set expectations of any performance, functional error rates before we go to production. Set that expectation in a test environment to the stakeholders. This sprint, we focused on performance. We took 10% off our bottom line. Set that expectation. When you go to production, realize that expectation. Double check yourself. Were you accurate? That's kind of what we say production readiness is we look at a test environment like a production environment like that. We try and model our traffic like production, just so we can realize these things that can happen as you go into production. So it takes some work to get there. The environment, it's a constant ongoing work, but being able to realize slight deviations in a test environment is awesome. So the deep transaction traces and snapshots to find code issues, we kind of talked about this, but yeah, if you're in a crunch situation, whether it's for a test that's a bug report or a production environment, those snapshots are powerful. Being able to pull out every single query, being able to excuse me, attach those to a bug report It's cool, but what are other things? What if every sprint you say, I'm going to look at my top 10 slowest queries in my entire environment, and I'm going to get one of those queries into a story, a bug report for a 2-week sprint. Eventually you're going to run out of your slow queries and move on to something else. Little things at a time. Don't try and bite off the whole head at once. So set up automated notification rules for performance testing. This is kind of what I talked about. The more you can automate in your reporting of it, the more powerful you are, the more time you have freed up to write more automated scripts or to do other things. Let AppDynamics tell you when you deviate. Don't go looking for that problem. Let it tell you via alerts, via customized reports, scheduled reports, dashboards, all the things at your disposal. Let AppDynamics do its job in a test environment. You know, a lot of people are like, well, it's a production tool. I disagree. Let it do its production job in test. So, reduce cost and risk with automated change analysis. And this is kind of what I mean by this is a lot of people are like, you mean change management? I said, no, change analysis. What did that change really do to your environment? Whether it's in test or production. You know, let AppDynamics tell you that. You know, do I need more hardware? Do I need less hardware? Can I pull some hardware and reallocate it? Let it tell you what those code changes, individual code changes do. You could have, depending on your environment, every check-in builds, it can move straight in this environment. You instantly will have results. Understand the performance impact of application, server, database changes, and infrastructure changes. So it could be something simple as, you know, we replaced a firewall or a load balancer. Ideally, we did that in test first, and we realized performance of that infrastructure piece. It could be a new storage volume, whatever it is. Realize the impact of that environment via your automated testing before you do it in production, if possible. Stuff happens in production, but the goal is obviously to do it in test. And so, identify and resolve unplanned changes proactively. There's always scope creep. In any given sprint, you're always going to have unplanned work. You're always going to have unplanned events in production. You know, unplanned surges of traffic, various things. Being able to identify it's the first step. So, and resolving it, you know, let AppDynamics do its job. Let it tell you where to resolve it. So, kind of some benefits that we kind of quickly, you know, realize is set performance expectations before production deployments. We realize, and this is kind of a broad statement, but about a 40% improvement on various metrics regarding performance since we started using AppDynamics in test. Fine-tune alert and business policies prior to production deployments. This is powerful. It sounds so simple, but I can't tell you how much business transaction maintenance you will do in production if you don't do this. You're trying to figure out what business transactions do. You don't understand your production traffic, you know, and how am I going to alert on it? You're instantly going to production with a gap in alerting because you don't know how to alert on it. But if you've honed that in the development process early on, in the test process, it promotes to production with it. They're known working policies. Identify testing requirements and testing gaps. So kind of the flow map, what I talked about. What does our automated test touch? What services does it talk to? What databases does it talk to? If it's just true automated test, the hardest part of automated testing is reporting. Let the flow map tell you. Let it tell you your gaps. Let it tell you what to prioritize. What do I automate next? It can do that. By you do an automated test and you say, oh, well, what's service A over here? It's getting a lot of calls, but no one knows what it is. Let it tell you where you should focus on. You can break it down into doing specific tests at the service layer. But identifying those gaps is again, step one. And so one of the big things, when we first started doing performance testing in-house, we didn't go buy a big tool. And in my mind, that big tool really buys you reporting. So we already had AppDynamics. We moved into test. It handled our reporting. Instead of burying in hundreds of thousands of lines in SQL and writing queries to report on it and make pretty dashboards to report on it, use AppDynamics to do it. We decreased the test reporting time, and the 5 hours is probably an understatement. We would spend lots of time trying to figure out what that performance test did, what were the error rates, what were the metrics for the back end of the system during the, you know, all the things you're trying to get data on, response times, failure rates, average, min, max, all that stuff. pull it all out of AppDynamics and custom reports and dashboards and metric browser, and your time is down to 20 minutes. That's an overstatement. So both those numbers are actually off. So, but what I'm saying is, you'd rather spend time scripting, writing new scripts, doing things that matter instead of trying to figure out how to report on something that you did. So, kind of a broad statement of benefits here. There's many more benefits of this, but it's really, the benefits will hone to your environment. What do you do with it? You know, I think of these, the performance benefits, that's what you expect from performance testing. What I didn't expect is to have known working policies for alerting when I moved into production. That was a cool side effect that we realized. You know, it's, how am I going to alert on this? What business transactions matter? You know, maybe if I start early off the development cycle, we could think about how we set up our URLs, how we set up our calls to make it better for AppDynamics. Start talking about that early on in a development design meeting. How are we going to use AppDynamics with this? How can we benefit this development cycle by honing it towards AppDynamics? Maybe instead of doing query strings, you're passing JSON, Bob. It's various different things of it. You know, if I change this call to a different method, I don't have to write regex to figure out my business transactions in my calls. Just simple things, but eventually add up and snowball into lots of time. So if you hone all that in test, you're ready for production and migrate it with your code straight to production. So kind of a Q&A. I went way too fast. But I was hoping this would kind of be like an interactive session. And you know, if there's other questions and you want to answer after, I'm sure you can hit up any of the AppDynamics guys, and they can get in contact with me. I'd love to hear from any of y'all. But generally, any questions right off the bat? Yes, sir?
I was just wondering, so you talked a little about your performance testing that you did. I assume that you have a test team or something that kind of writes the tests and all that, performance tests and things like that.
Uh-huh.
Now, as far as the AppDynamics end, what did you guys devise and develop on that in order to help you analyze performance metrics and things like that?
So AppDynamics, one of the hurdles that we have, it's actually kind of hard to get some people to even want to get into AppDynamics. It's hard to get developers to want to get into, in our environment at least. They don't really want to get into it. You know, I don't know whether they know their code's awesome or, you know, whatever it is. So what I found to kind of enable that is make it easier for them. Give them shared dashboards that they don't even have to log in to see. Enable them to see what their code is actually doing. That's kind of what we're working towards. We don't want everybody to say, oh, I forgot another account and log in, this and that. We don't want to make it hard for them. Enable them. Enable teammates. You know, have group sharing. Like, look what I found in AppDynamics. I learn something new every time I'm in there. I'm like, wow, you know, and then start thinking, what can I do with that? How can I twist this around and you know, think out of the box and use it differently? So, yeah, it's challenging. In our environment, we have we're a rather small team. We're a very agile, small team, but we don't have I'm probably the subject matter expert for AppDynamics in our team, but I aim to facilitate other people, and then you'll find people, once they see how powerful it is, they'll start gravitating towards it, is what we've experienced. And when you're doing that in test, before they were forced to jump into it in a fire situation in production. So getting them to grasp, you know, thinking about this early and thinking about what you can do in AppDynamics and test is a little bit more of an effort. But once they see the power of it and see, you know, how much it'll benefit you, it tends to gravitate and snowball up a little bit.
So as a quick follow-up, relating to AppDynamics and performance monitoring testing, do you rely more upon dashboards and things or more upon health rules and policies and alerting things, or both?
If you made me pick one, I would say alerting policies. Dashboards are just kind of a graphical snapshot. You know, our environment's a very open environment. We got 60-inch LEDs, 6, 7, 8 of them all the way around. And we spin up small little scrum teams for a new project. 3, 4 developers, 1 tester. We can make a new dashboard, and they actually literally will move to the same area and sit there during that project. Give them a custom dashboard right in their environment. Let them tell you what they want to see on that dashboard. So that's kind of, the dashboard-wise, that's just kind of graphical. But the alerting policies, and that's really where the power is. It automatically alerts you, but it also hones your policies to move into production with it. So that's kind of, it kills two birds with one stone.
Yeah,
Yes.
question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing you've been speaking is your test environment. Is it an exact mirror of your production environment?
Not quantity. It's scaled down. But as far as configuration and actual hardware, pardon?
Business transactions is similar in prod and your test?
Is the transactions?
The business transaction.
Yes. So we actually, when we first brought it into test, we imported our production down into test. That's the only time we want to do that, ideally. We used our production installation for really what is production traffic, what business transactions, how many they get, and even the time of days that we see them. So we brought all that information down into the test environment, the business transactions, and then we scripted to try and replicate that. So yeah, but the number of machines, it's toned down. It's just a financial decision. But we are very sure to say, configuration-wise, I have max threads set the same as test and production, connection counts, memory usage, memory settings, actually, heap sizes and all that, we do match for production. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And how about databases in that situation? What are you guys doing with that? Are you creating your own, or are you sanitizing prod?
So this is a constant battle. That's a good question. It's a constant battle for us because our production environment is changing so much. And one of the hurdles is it's hard to find a bad query if you don't have matching data. You don't realize you're missing an index until you got 5 billion rows in there. And so that's a hurdle for us. For PCI reasons, we couldn't bring everything down into our test environment. So it's a constant hurdle. We're not sanitizing every day. We're trying to build up data in test. So we want a comparable size database. But that is a hurdle for us. And depending on what your business is, you might be able to bring it down from production. We've actually worked on generating extra data, so we had a comparable database. And we're in Oracle. We don't use the database monitoring extension. It's something we're actually talking about. So we see high-level calls. We see SQL calls, response times. But besides that, we have a small DBA group that if we need to dive into something in that Oracle environment, then we can go that route. Right now, we just see the minimums. And it's really, honestly, for a test environment, it seems to be enough information. It's pretty cool to be able to say, here's your top 10 slow queries for the entire environment, and then break it down into, say, order services. Here's your top 10 slowest queries. And they're called by these transactions, and then chip away at them from there. That's kind of the way we look at it. Yes?
So 3 questions. So one, when you guys are doing your sprint planning, are tasks coming out as well as creating business transactions, and who is responsible for creating the unique?
Yes.
Is it dev? Is it tester? Is it you? Someone in DevOps?
Yes, so we use Pivotal. And in Pivotal, we can set task up. And so we would actually put a note in there saying, create, and this is a general, but create a cart transaction. And QA would be responsible for making that. Because when it goes into QA, we want to start creating that transaction and being able to alert on it as early on as possible. So that would be assigned in there. We also use it like if there's something very specific, a developer would say, we really need to focus on this from a performance standpoint. It'll get tagged in the story in Pivotal, performance, and then they would make a note on really what they really want to double check on.
And then as far as migrating and version control of business transactions, various alerting policies, that's one thing that we've struggled with a little bit. There are slight variations in environments.
Mm-hmm.
We have our production environment with 3 data centers. It's going to be Amazon, and in the test environment we're not in as many data centers. And so one big fear I have is corrupting business transactions going from test to production. Because I know there's some type of Java tool you can download that was in beta for a while, pulling configurations out.
That's actually what we're using.
Wondering, okay, well, I can't really check this straight into my source control repository, because there are variations between test and production just by
Sure.
server names or how are you guys handling all that
So we actually are using that standalone Java tool, and we're promoting it with it. But it's a careful process. Well, what we're normally do, if I know code is going out tomorrow, that I want that policy in place. If it's something that's got large, like a big alerting policy or something, I will use that tool. If it's a handful of business transactions, I'll match them manually as I promote it to it. I'll do it the day before. I'll do it 2 days before. It doesn't really matter till the code's in production. So it's kind of a case-by-case deal. I've never had a problem of anything going corrupt from doing the import-export process. But yeah, it would be a concern if you corrupted everything. I am safe to take a copy if I am doing anything via the automated way. I'd take a copy beforehand. If I need to re-import it, I could. So just.
Nice if AppDynamics actually had version control and the ability to promote from environments.
I've actually.
Akamai or other big players out there that allow you to have pre-production environments. I don't know if anyone from AppDynamics is hearing this, but that's a big.
So it's funny you said that. So I've actually I've asked for that before. I know it's on some of the roadmap things. There's a customer advisory board on Friday that's like number one on my list to bring up.
Cool. And then one thing, final question. So everything can be running swimmingly, from let's say your router or your border router down, and databases are fine. You're not hitting any thresholds or transactions, but maybe people just can't get to your front door. How are you guys learning on that? Are you learning basically saying that, hey, we should expect X number of orders per hour, and if you're below that threshold, we alert? Like, do you have any?
So, two ways. We actually have an external monitor that will basically check for pings, this and that, uptime. But also, we set up alerts for too few calls.
Okay.
If all of a sudden my welcome page sees 0 calls in a minute, something's wrong.
Okay.
So we kind of flipped the alerting policy upside down and said, well, the off-case stuff, what if just a single service is down? How can I alert on that? Well, too few calls is normally the situation. And sometimes we even say if CPU usage is under a certain amount, we expect a certain amount of CPU. If it's hanging at 0 or 1% for too long, something's wrong. So yeah, we alert on it. It's kind of two fronts from there. Mm-hmm. Questions? Yes.
You mentioned that you're trying to start the performance test as early as possible in the development cycle.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a challenge that if we start too early, the code is not very stable.
Uh-huh.
And your performance metric you collected maybe a lot of error, timeout. So how do you do that?
So the goal in starting performance testing early is to find blatant, obvious things. And a lot of times those obvious things are a design flaw. It's not necessarily just a single code problem. It's the entire way that was designed. So I want to catch that as early as possible in case we need to redesign. So I don't really worry about catching, if we have a new module, we performance test early, and then we make a code change and the baseline is drastically different, we would just re-baseline at that time. And so we might bring it down to a one-day baseline and then increase it from there.
So basically your functional test and performance test will keep on running again and again.
Again and again and again.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes?
How many different environments do you have, and which one are you doing this testing?
So we have total test environments. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And then what I'm asking is we have dev, QA, we have load test, and we have a certification and prod.
Okay.
Do you have a similar kind of?
Similar. And we only do AppDynamics and where we're doing the automated testing is what we're doing. And that's just, honestly, it's a kind of a license restriction for us. If we had unlimited licenses, I'd put it everywhere I could in the possible world. But, where we're doing the automated testing is where we find the benefit of it. So that's where we choose to do it. So we're in an automated environment and then production, obviously. Yes?
Do you provide the slides for download?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, we can do that. And Ann, is that something that you publicize, the slides? Okay. Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a recording of it. I see this camera on me up here. But yeah, definitely. We can provide the slides. Mm-hmm. And if you have any questions or whatever, my contact information can come from AppDynamics, and I'll gladly answer any questions. Good? Anything else?
Just out of curiosity, for your environment, without giving too much, how many tiers and how many business transactions do you guys track?
So there's a limitation of about 212 per application. And at first I was like, that's not enough. That's my first gut response, is that's not enough. And then we really started breaking it down and realizing how many of these transactions are really important as far as defining it. So we created catch-alls. And then out of that, we plucked out the important transactions, what we call important, cart checkout, the obvious transactions. And out of that, I think right now today, we're at 148, which in an e-commerce site it seems relatively small, but those are the ones that matter. Everything else goes into a catch-all. I don't want to go into all the traffic because then I lose data on it. But if it goes into a catch-all, obvious things like spring beans, the calls to just things that are just kind of fluff that you don't really care to see unless it goes bad. If it goes bad, you want to know, so you can alert on catch-all transactions. And it's just kind of a general saying, hey, my catch-alls are off. I know I got millions of kind of random transactions I don't care about, but it's usually a good indicator that something is wrong. That's how we do it. Anything else? Oh, sorry, I couldn't see the lights right there.
No worries. I think you just answered this question for you, but when you were dealing with the high volumes of transactions having AppDynamics and the analysis on all those transactions and provide those metrics, have you had any configuration issues with MySQL and stuff like that, databases and stuff?
No, one of the largest hurdles that we've had is actually on our queues, ActiveMQ. Configuration of seeing it. We're actively working on it. It doesn't seem to be the most stable deal, but we're using an ActiveMQ extension. So part of it is we're in an old version of ActiveMQ, I think, part of it. But that's been the biggest configuration hurdle we've had. We haven't had any other problems as far as any configuration from there besides that. So, Anything else? One more. They're telling me I'm out of time.
How was Black Friday?
Great. So this is kind of funny. I found myself Black Friday. We're not really a Black Friday retailer. We were busy. We were actually busy on Thanksgiving just because we promoted, hey, our stores are closed, but our website's up. But we were actually pretty busy for Thanksgiving. But what I found odd is I found myself getting on an airplane Monday morning, and I read the news before we take off, and USA Today is telling me about Target had this big outage, and various other retailers had these, not to name them out, but they had big outages. And here we were like sending IT people to a conference on Cyber Monday, and it's like that's totally ironic that AppDynamics had this week, kind of. But what I kind of found funny out of it is in the little AppDynamics app, the little active thing, I threw something in there. I said, only AppDynamics customers are confident enough to send their IT people to a conference on Cyber Monday. You know? Cool. Thank you all.